Well, good evening, folks, and welcome to our Tuesday night home Bible study. Tonight we will be looking at Genesis chapter 34. If you recall, last time Jacob and Esau have parted ways. Esau went back to Mount Seir, and Jacob and his family moved into the area around Shechem. And we're told that he had bought a piece of land from the children of Hamor, who is the father of Shechem, we were told. Now, Shechem is better known as a place as this area, but we're going to find out tonight that Shechem is actually a person as well. Some time has passed, and Jacob's children are now grown. We're not told exactly, how much time is gone, but the context of the story makes it clear that Jacob's sons, by and large, are adults at this time. And Jacob also has a daughter that has been mentioned just a couple of places before in the listings of the children. Let's read it and we'll talk about it. And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took, or seized her really, and lay with her and defiled her. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel, and spoke kindly or tenderly unto the damsel. And Shechem spoke unto his father Hamor, saying, Get me this damsel for my wife. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out unto Jacob to commune or to speak with him. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth or angry, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. And Hamor communed or spoke with them, saying, The soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you give him as his wife. And make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters unto us, and take our daughters unto you. And you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade ye therein, and get you possessions in it. And Shechem said unto her father and unto her brethren, Let me find grace in your eyes, and what you shall say unto me I will give. Ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as you shall say unto me, but give me the damsel as my wife. And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully, and said, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said unto him, We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. But in this we will consent unto you, if you will be as we be, that every male of you be circumcised. Then will we give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. But if you will not hearken unto us to be circumcised, then will we take our daughter, and we will be gone. And the words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. And the young man deferred not to do the thing, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honored, or it could be translated more honorable, or more honored, either one, than all the house of his father. And Hamor and Shechem his son came into the gate of their city, which is where official business would be done, and communed or spoke with the men of their city, saying, These men are peaceable with us, therefore let them dwell in the land and trade therein, for the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be our one people, if every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us. And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened all that went out of the gate of his city, and every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of his city. And it came to pass on the third day, when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword and came upon the city boldly and slew all the males. And they slew Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city, because they had defiled their sister. And they took their sheep and their oxen, their asses, and that which was in the city, and that which was in the field, and all their wealth, and all their little ones, and their wives took they captive, and spoiled even all that was in the house. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me to make me to stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and I, being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house. And they said, should he deal with our sister as with an harlot? And the story ends with that unanswered question. This is one of the more sordid stories in the Old Testament. There are some others. One of the things that's true in the Bible is it does not spare us from the gory details many times of what actually went on. In many places, it appears that some rather ruthless activities took place, not only by people that were the pagans around Israel, but by Israelites as well. Another story this brings to mind, I'll just mention it. You can read it on your own. It's found in Judges 19. It's the story of the Levite's concubine, and it again is, if you want something that's really kind of R-rated in terms of violence and gory details, that's another very heinous story. Some time has passed since Jacob has bought the piece of land from the sons of Hamor, whose was identified in verse 19, the previous chapter, as Shechem's father, which gave us a foreshadowing that Shechem is going to become a person that we'll probably read about, and we read about him right here. These children of Jacob are grown up now. And there's several things in this story that's going on. One of these is we get a picture of how unruly and violent and self-willed the sons of Jacob are. Remember, this is a mixed up family. There are 4 mothers in this household, and there are 4 different sets of children. Jacob is the father of all of them, but there's 4 different mothers, and there's really 4 different classes and levels of children. There's the children of Rachel, who is the favorite wife, Joseph and later Benjamin, and they're the favorite ones. They're the ones that Jacob really loves. And then there's the children of Leah, the wife that wasn't loved as much, and they're not, they're second class. And then there's the children of Bilhah and Zilpah that are the 2 slaves, and they are in a different couple of classes as well. And so it's a really mixed up situation. And one of the themes in this story is the permissiveness of parents in this story. You've got Jacob is very permissive. He's very passive. Jacob is not a major player in this story. Jacob doesn't really take any action. He doesn't make any decisions about what's happened to Dinah. And he just sort of leaves the sons on their own to do as they will, and they do. And go a lot further than he would have had them to do. Then there's the father of Shechem, Hamor, who doesn't restrain his son, doesn't do any correction there. Again, you've got these people who are Canaanites, and they are idol worshipers. They're pagans. And their morality and their system of thinking about things is totally different from that of the Hebrew people. Another thing that's going on in this story, and we need to always remember when we read these stories in Genesis that, if these stories written down during the time of Moses, when the children of Israel were in the wilderness or getting ready to go into the promised land or on the verge of going into the promised land during this era when the stories were written, they were written to be instructive to the Israelites in terms of preparing them to make conquest of the land of Canaan. And one of the things that's going on here is it is instilling in the original readers the fact that the Hebrew people are set apart as God's people. They need to not lose their identity as the people of God and as the Hebrew people. Also, their morality is totally different from that of the pagan nations. And they need to keep that in mind. As well as, the moral teaching here about parents should be, taking care of their children and controlling them and disciplining them as well. Another theme in this story is that of sowing and reaping. The rash actions of Simeon and Levi in retaliating against Shechem's defiling of his raping, really, of Dinah, it brings about some consequences that Jacob didn't really want to have happen. Another theme here is the sovereignty of God, as the plan of God, though it seemingly is threatened by the activities and choices of these sons of Israel. God's plan and God's sovereignty continues to carry out the plan, and it's great that God has a plan that He's carrying out. Sometimes sometimes we are cooperative in His plan moving forward, and sometimes we may be hindering it by our choices. But He is carrying forward His plan, and we can either get on board and be part of it, or sometimes we can be maybe run over by it a little bit. Well, let's look at the story now. Dinah is the only daughter that's mentioned among the children of Jacob. In fact, many times daughters were not mentioned and listed in the genealogical material in the Bible. Usually whenever daughters are mentioned, it's because they're going to become a major character somewhere later on. Dinah has been mentioned in the listings of the children of Jacob and his wives and concubines earlier, and the reason she's mentioned is because she's coming up here to be a more major player in one of the stories. Dinah is, her mother is Leah, and Dinah has 6 full-blooded brothers. There are 6 sons that are born to Leah that are sons of Jacob. Actually, the older ones of Jacob's sons are Leah's children. The first one is Reuben, and then the second two, the second oldest and the third oldest, are Simeon and Levi that emerge as being rather cruel and violent here in their response in the story. But Dinah is the very youngest child that Leah bore, and being the daughter and being the youngest of those children, she probably held special favor in the eyes of Jacob as well as her brothers and her mother. Well, she has gone out to get to know some of the daughters of the land, and this young man Shechem, who the place carries his name after this, he's the son of Hamor the Hivite, and so these are the Hivites and the Perizzites and they're all of these different ites, the Amorites. They're all groups of Canaanite peoples, and he is, we're told, a prince of the country. So he is a man of some means, and you know, his father is wealthy, and in fact, Jacob has bought some land from them, and so this is a leading family here. And he sees Dinah, and he takes her. Your Revised Standard Version actually says he seized her and lay with her. That is, he raped her and defiled her. Interestingly, the defilement here is it's a Hebrew word that oftentimes is used in the Old Testament to speak about rendering a person ceremonially unclean in terms of being able to participate in worship at the tabernacle and the temple. It's not limited to that meaning, but the idea here is that in his activity, he has disgraced this girl. Again, women didn't have many rights in that day and time, and her marketability, I guess you'd say, as a wife, has been hindered by what Hamor has done. In fact, later on in the giving of the law, for example, in Leviticus as well as in Deuteronomy and a place or two in Numbers, and actually Exodus also speaks to this, there are some very strict guidelines given about sexual activity. And sexual activity apart from those that are married to each other for the people of God is strictly forbidden. And one of the things that's going on here in terms of maintaining the identity of the children and the family of Israel is that they could quite easily thwart if it worked out this way, and if God allowed it, the plan of God for them to be a distinct people if they get to begin to intermarry with the Canaanites. Again, the children of Israel camped at Mount Sinai or getting ready to go into the Promised Land. The original readers of this would also be bearing in mind that they have been forbidden, strictly forbidden upon conquest of the land of Canaan under Joshua later on. They've been strictly forbidden to intermarry with the Canaanites. And they are to utterly drive them out and not, mix with them because, for one thing, the worship of the Canaanites, the idolatry, they'll pass it on to them and pervert the worship of God, which actually is what happened in the Old Testament. They didn't drive out all the Canaanites and the Canaanite worship, the idolatry, which was fertility worship. As the Israelites learned to farm from these people, they learned the fertility worship that was wrapped up in their agricultural practices, and it messed up the worship of the children of Israel, and they ended up later on going into exile, and that's the reason that's given in 1st and 2nd Kings for this. Anyway, Dinah goes out, and there Shechem sees her, and he seizes her, he lays with her, defiles her, and then we're told that he also loved her. He wanted to marry her after this. So, he was not totally without some good in him. But he had gone about this all the wrong way. Very impulsive young man, just at the mercy of his desires. And again, that's a picture of paganism. One of the things that sets biblical faith apart is the high moral standards that people who follow biblical faith, children of Israel in the Old Testament, Christians in the New Testament, very high moral standard. One of the things that's been quite attractive to people in Old Testament times, people were attracted to the Hebrew faith particularly in the later Old Testament times and during the intertestamental period, many people were proselytized and became proselytes, attracted by the fact that there was one God and that there was high moral standards for the people of Israel. Anyway, Shechem doesn't have these. He's different. And one of the things we need to keep in mind is that believers are different from non-believers. When you get to the New Testament, believers are strictly forbidden to marry non-believers. Be not unequally yoked with unbelievers, the Apostle Paul said. For what fellowship hath light with darkness? What communion hath righteousness with unrighteousness? We have to be very careful. And so this is a story that was the original readers reading it there at Mount Sinai or getting ready to go into the Promised Land would have read it as an instructional thing to warn them, you know. Anyway, so Jacob finds out what's happened. And Shechem gets his father to go and talk to Dinah's father. Let her be my wife. And he's already he's gone about this all wrong. But at least now it sounds like he wants to try to make it right. And again, we're all sinners. We go about a lot of things the wrong way, and sometimes we're trying to do a good thing and do it the wrong way and just make a mess out of it. And so he goes and talks to Jacob. It sounds like Shechem is with Hamor, but Hamor, the father, does the talking, and Jacob doesn't really say anything till the sons, who are grown now, they come in from the field. And we're told when they heard it, they were grieved and they were wroth or angry because, quote, he had wrought folly in Israel. Notice, wrought folly in Israel. Israel here is spoken of as a nation. Again, you got the 12 sons and the daughter and the wife's family of Jacob, but they're the seed part for a nation. They're not a nation yet, but the readers are a nation. And wrought folly in Israel is one of those phrases that we find sprinkled throughout, particularly throughout the Pentateuch, and really later on in the Old Testament as well. But it is used in speaking of heinous kinds of sins, those that are quite rebellious. One of the places that comes to mind is in Joshua chapter 14, when the children of Israel are making conquest of the land of Palestine, and the first city that they make conquest of is Jericho, and they march around the city each day for 7 days, and the seventh day they march around it 7 times, and the priests blow the trumpets, and the people give a shout, and the walls fall down flat, and they are forbidden, though, to take any of the spoils of Jericho, because that city, under the kind of doctrine of holy war that you have in the Old Testament that emerges here and there, the first conquest, first city is supposed to be devoted solely to God, and all the spoil is supposed to be his. But there's a particular man named Achan. His name means troublemaker. I wonder if they named him that afterwards or if he already had the name. He takes a wedge of gold and a goodly Babylonish garment and buries them under his tent and thinks nobody knows. Well, it all becomes known, and God has seen it, and the judgment comes on all of Israel because he had wrought folly in Israel, is what we're told. In fact, that's what he's accused of in Genesis 7, verse 15. He's wrought folly in Israel. Another thing that is oftentimes connected with wrought folly in Israel is sexual sin that's like that of the pagans around Israel. In fact, if you sometime you can read it on your own, but Leviticus 18, that whole chapter is warning Israel not to do, quote, after the doings of Egypt or after the doings of Canaan as they go into the land of Canaan. And they're forbidden to, all kinds of sexual sins are, they're given, prohibitions against all kinds of sexual sins, such as incest and adultery and homosexuality and all kinds of sexual sins that the pagan people of the ancient world did all the time. Just like in the world in which we live today. The pagans are involved in all this kind of stuff all the time. But for those that follow the teachings of Scripture, those the Old Testament Hebrews, the New Testament Christians, the standards are much higher. And in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 21, and being involved in these kinds of sexual sins, we're told that they've wrought folly in Israel. And some of those sins under the law of Moses carried, capital, were capital offenses because they've wrought folly in Israel. And other things too, such as idolatry is included in this kind of thing. But to say he had wrought folly in Israel, that highlights the utter wickedness of this thing in the eyes of the Hebrew people who would be reading this. And and we're told also that Jacob's sons are quite upset about this. And this is not something that should just, in fact, we're told which thing ought not to be done. And so Hamor says, come on and y'all intermarry with us and let us intermarry with y'all, and we'll just be, y'all can trade with us and the whole land's before you. You can take our daughters for your wives and we'll take your daughters for our wives, and we'll just all be one people. And on the surface, might have sounded pretty good. Probably was quite tempting. Later on for the Israelites going into the promised land, that thing quite tempting. But again, God had made those promises to Abraham and to Abraham's descendants, not to Shechem and Hamor and their descendants. Anyway, so the sons of Jacob answered deceitfully. That is, they were dishonest. Because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. They didn't feel any moral obligation, to be honest with these people that treated their sister that way. Is kind of sort of how it comes across, at least to me. And they said, okay, well, we cannot, it's against our practice to give our sister to anybody who's uncircumcised. Now, circumcision has not been mentioned since back in chapter 17 when the covenant of circumcision was given by God to Abraham. Well, the word's not even occurred again. And but here it's sort of is they use this sort of as a convenience. And again, they may have thought, well, these guys, they won't want to do all of this with all of them. And they said, if you don't, every one of you do this, then we'll take our daughter and we'll be gone. We'll leave. And so Hamor is willing to do this, and his son Shechem, and we're told that he was more honorable or more honored than all the house of his father. And, Shechem does seem to, he wants to marry Dinah. At least she's not just somebody he's going to now dispose of. He does want to do the right thing in as much as he can. If he had done it to start with, or had some discretion, things could have went maybe a little better. But again, pagans and the people of God just do not think the same way. And so then Hamor and his son go to the town and to try to sell the idea to all the men of the town. And they go into the gate of the city where official business was done. And Hamor does the talking, and he says, yes, these people, we could get all their cattle and all of their, want all their beasts and their cattle be ours. Only let them dwell with us, and all we have to do is all the males be circumcised. He fails to mention what Shechem had done to Jacob's daughter. Fails to mention, what it was that they were really after in this. But he sells it in a material way and appeals to the greed of the men of the town. And again, people that are the people of God are not supposed to be motivated by our greed. Unfortunately, sometimes we are. But the unsaved and the pagans, and the idolatrous groups in Canaan and still, pagans today generally are at the mercy of their passions. Anyway, so they all agreed to do it. And so they, all were circumcised. 3 days later, while all the men of the town were sore from this, Simeon and Levi, who oftentimes in the Old Testament, Simeon and Levi spoken of together as a pair, they go through the town and they kill every man. They slew all the males. And they slew Hamor and Shechem and took Dinah out of Shechem's house. She's already kind of sort of there. I guess they figured he's already, done what he did. So she's already there in the house. They take her out. Wonder how she felt about all of this. Just think, she's kind of a victim all the way through here. Sort of a tragic story from her perspective. With the treatment that she got from Shechem to start with, and then he wanted to marry her. We're not told how she felt. And again, this being just an ancient story and reflecting the culture of that day and time, probably nobody asked her how she felt. It's real easy for us, to look back and to stand in judgment, on these folks. A wise professor I had in college, Dr. Keyser, used to say in church history classes, we got to be careful about making judgments on the people of the past, because there's going to be people in the future who are going to be making judgments on us and on our views and on our doings. Again, it's, in the day and age in which we live, something that's been rather recent is the views about what do we do with the Confederate memorials and things now. And there's, it doesn't matter what your views are on this, but people's views about things are different than they used to be. Well, we better be careful in passing judgment on views of people in the past, because in the future people will be passing judgment on the views and the moral judgments that we make. Anyway, they killed everybody, took all the possessions, took all the wealth, took all the animals, took all the children and the wives, and obviously it sounds like they must have made them slaves. We're not told what they did with them after this. The story's just kind of over. But Jacob, finally, he scolds Simeon and Levi. You have troubled me. Hebrew is, you've stirred me up. It's like stirring up water, to make me stink among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And there's just a few of us, and now we're going to be in trouble, and we're not going to have the favor of these people, and they're going to, come after us and try to destroy us. You've made us enemies to these people. Again, sowing and reaping. We live with the choices we make. Not only is Hamor and his son Shechem, not only is he impulsive, but there's Simeon and Levi. They're just as impulsive in their own way. And they're moved by their anger that there's like a forest fire that gets out of control. and takes them a lot further than they would have wanted to go if they'd been thinking clearly. We've got to be careful letting our tempers get away from us and destroying that whole town. Later on in Genesis 49, just before Jacob dies, he gives a prophecy to each one of his sons, sort of like the blessing that Isaac gave him. Again, that kind of thing, real important to Jacob. And he gives one to each of his sons before he dies. Of course, they're not all blessings. He tells Reuben, "You're weak as water because you went into one of my concubines, behind my back." And he puts sort of a curse on Simeon and Levi, that instruments of cruelty are in your houses, and you in your self-will and your anger, you were cruel and destroyed and killed people. Again, he scolds them, doesn't really do anything. Again, if Jacob had taken some action at the beginning of the story, as a father maybe should have in this case, might could have prevented a real tragedy. The story ends with their question back to him: should he deal with our sister as a harlot? The lesson for the original readers getting ready to go into the promised land, the lesson to them pretty clear. Keep your distinctiveness as the people of God. Lesson for us: keep our distinctiveness as the people of God. Be separated. And don't adopt the ways and the doings of the pagans. Another thing too, correct your children when they need it. And finally, the thing that overarches over all of this story is the sovereignty of God. That though it appears that Jacob's life and his future are threatened, in the next chapter God will protect him and move him to another place, and Jacob is taken care of from then on, and his family, they have to, live with the consequences of what they do. But God has a plan that is going on, and it's going on, and it's going on. And central to that plan is that one day God sent his son, Jesus Christ, who came into this world, was born of a virgin, lived a perfect life so he could die the death that I deserve to die for my sins. He could die the death that you deserve to die for your sins. The wages of our sins are death. Jesus died that death for us. And he could do that because he had never sinned and he didn't have death in his future. He died the death that was ours to die. And he rose again the third day, proving that he had paid for every one of our sins and purchased forgiveness from the holy God of the universe. The resurrection of Jesus proves we can be forgiven. Just like Hamor or Shechem, we make bad choices. Just like Simeon and Levi, we make bad choices. And we've got it in us, and we'll never live up to the standards of God. But Jesus Christ did, and he purchased a way for us to be put right with God if we'll trust in him and receive him as our Lord. Hope you have a good night, and thank you for tuning in with us.